There's a very little known event that happened in England around 1700. And this little known event unexpectedly led to the Industrial Revolution. And without this little known event, the Industrial Revolution would have been delayed significantly, and the world we live in today would be vastly different. And this little known event, inside this little known event, are two crucial ideas about life and success in general. The first idea is something called the law of unintended consequences. This is whenever you have some government type entity that looks out into the vast complexity of society, and they have an idea of a certain outcome. And so they impose a law to try to create this outcome. But when they impose this law, they only impose this law on a very small section of society, and they don't really recognize that society is a massively complex system with a ton of interdependent variables. And whenever you change one thing, that changes all these other things. And what usually ends up happening is they have an outcome. They impose some law, but they usually get the opposite of the outcome they wanted. One of my favorite examples of the law of unintended consequence was the rise of Christianity in the 1st century AD, when it was still a fledgling religion in the Roman Empire. And back then, nobody really accepted Christianity yet. It took a couple hundred years. And so the government didn't like these Christians because they weren't worshiping the official Roman gods, which were associated with the Roman government. And so they came up with a plan to decrease the rise of Christianity. And this plan was to publicly and horrifically and violently execute these Christians, feed them to the lions in the Colosseum. Their thinking was, if people see these Christians getting torn apart by lions and tigers in the Colosseum, that will make them think, oh, I don't want to be a Christian. But what happened was something they didn't anticipate: unintended consequences. These Christians died very, very bravely. They died very, very heroically because they knew they were going to someplace better. And they knew that because they were dying because of their beliefs, they would be exalted in heaven. And so everybody was like, who are these guys? What do they know that we don't know? And that increased people's interest in Christianity, and that actually accelerated the rise of Christianity. So the government's intention was to decrease the rise of Christianity. They imposed some kind of action within society, and the result of that action is the opposite of what they wanted, which in this case is the rise of Christianity. And if you look through history, you can find examples of the law of unintended consequences everywhere. The other principle in this little known event is a recommendation from Stoicism that the obstacle is the way. Whenever you come up against an obstacle, that obstacle will show you how to continue on. If you figure out how to overcome this obstacle, this will teach you what you need to know to get closer to your goal. So what was this little known event in England in the 1700s that led to the Industrial Revolution? Well, up until the 1700s in England, the wool industry was huge. In fact, it was England's main industry. And because it was such a huge industry, the wool industry had a lot of control over the government. They had a lot of lobbying power. It was kind of like the wool industrial complex. But right around then, merchants started to import finished cotton from India and sell it in England. And they sold it at a huge profit. These merchants were making a shit ton of money. They were like, this is awesome. This is like a free gold mine money. You buy cotton from India, pay 10 cents per square meter or whatever. You sell it in England for like 30 cents per square meter, and you just make a ton of money. But this threatened the wool industry. The wool industry did not like this because now people were buying cotton instead of wool. And so they used their lobbying power to convince the government to make it illegal or to significantly limit the import of finished cotton. They did this to protect their industry. And you'll find this same process in history as well. A huge industry lobbies the government to restrict imports to protect that industry. That's essentially what tariffs are, to restrict the imports to protect the national industry. But what they didn't do was they didn't restrict the import of raw cotton. They only restricted the import of finished cotton. And so these merchants, having had a taste of the money you could make by selling cotton in England, were thinking, holy crap, if we could take this raw cotton and figure out a way to turn this raw cotton into finished cotton goods like shirts and sheets and stuff, we could make a fortune. Now, at the time, nobody in England knew how to turn raw cotton into finished cotton. They could sort of do it, but it was very, very slow and very, very clumsy and not nearly profitable enough. And so this set off a race between inventors and people that could think outside the box and use ideas from other industries. And one of the dudes that was involved in this was some guy that used to buy hair from a barber and weave the hair into wigs. And he applied his knowledge to the cotton industry. And so all these people got involved with the idea or the problem or the potential lucrative solution of taking raw cotton and turning it into finished cotton. And that took about 50 years. And that happened at the same time that all these guys, these engineers, were trying to find out how to burn coal, which was recently discovered, how to burn coal, make water boil, and use the steam to spin stuff around and make steam engines. And all this stuff kind of happened at the same time. And they figured out it's like a 6-step process from raw cotton to finished cotton goods. So you need a machine for each part. And they figured out all these machines that were super efficient, where one person could do a lot of stuff at once. And then they combined it with a steam engine, and poof, this is when you got the Industrial Revolution. Then they had this massive process where you could take a crap ton of raw cotton, weave it into finished goods, and sell it all over the place. And that's how everybody got rich. In fact, this is exactly how Japan went from a backwards country to a first world player within one generation. They had no electricity, they had no cars, they had not a lot of running water, and they imported these cotton factory ideas, these cotton loom machines, these steam-driven cotton machines that would turn raw cotton into finished cotton, and they imported raw cotton, and they would import these two things, they would make cotton, they would sell it, and they got rich, and it took them one generation to use that wealth from turning raw cotton into finished cotton, and they catapulted themselves into a world player. They used all their money from this process to build their army, to build their navy, and that's what essentially led them on the path to try to take over the world. So the message is clear. The unintended consequence is the wool industry tried to enact a law through the government to protect themselves, but they ended up destroying themselves by launching a brand new industry. And the obstacle is from the merchants when they were having this easy money by importing finished cotton and selling finished cotton, but then no longer they could do that because it was illegal. Now they have a problem. How do we keep making money? All we have is this raw cotton. That was the obstacle, and that turned out to be the way, because once they solved this problem, everybody got rich, and the whole world has been getting rich ever since then. So the message is clear. When you come up against an obstacle, don't give up. Keep going forward. Now, most people, when they come up against an obstacle, they think, oh, life should be easy. I should just get some guaranteed plan for success, this step-by-step blueprint where I don't have to think, I don't have to risk anything, and I should just get free money and free sex and free everything. But when they come up to an obstacle, they just kind of give up. But somebody like you knows better. You know that behind every obstacle is the path to greater success. You know that when you accept obstacles and overcome obstacles, on the other side you will learn more about yourself. On the other side of every obstacle, you will learn more about the world. The process of going through an obstacle will force you to learn new skills that you did learn before. And so you'll combine these three ideas. You'll know more about yourself. You'll have more skills. You'll know more about the world, and that can catapult you to higher and higher success. So every obstacle you come up with, every setback, everything that seems to make things more difficult for you is a path to greater success, but only if you embrace the idea that the obstacle is the way. If you compare super successful people with super unsuccessful people, you'll find some similarities. The unsuccessful people are always looking for easy, magic shortcuts that don't require any work, that don't require any effort, that don't require any any dangerous thinking or risk or uncomfortable feelings. But the successful people, one of their skill sets is embracing and overcoming obstacles. And if you want to become very successful in any area of life, if you want to make more money, if you want to get more girls, get more guys, have more success, you need to embrace obstacles. And overcoming obstacles is the path to success. The most guaranteed path to success is to embrace and overcome obstacles. If you'd like to learn how to do this, check out the links below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.